There it's going. Okay, so Ecology 1, the basics of food webs and the connection of life. And the circle of life. The food web is over here on the bottom. On the left-hand side, these are when there's multiple links together, multiple parts to the chain together. So our food web connects food chains. It shows an energy transfer within our ecosystem. Then within the food chain, there are things called autotrophs and things called heterotrophs. Autotrophs are producers, which mean they make their own food. Traditionally, these are plants. Heterotrophs are consumers, and they have to consume or eat autotrophs. These are usually animals within our food chain. There are some heterotrophic plants, like the Venus flytrap and the pitcher plant, which get their energy from the absorption of other animals or plants. An apex predator is usually the top of the food chain or the food web. This means that nothing eats it. So like usually in a person's food chain, we would be considered the apex predator because nothing really eats us except for decomposers. On the right, we have the primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. Primary consumers eat the autotrophs or the producers. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. I wrote the little one with the degree sign because that's how you show prime. So this is our primary consumers. Then the tertiary animals are the third level consumers, and they eat secondary consumers. There's a fourth level in the picture to the upper left called a quaternary consumer. These eat the tertiary or the third level consumers. And we usually refer to these Q consumers as an apex consumer. So the abiotic factors, this is a vocab word, so you may need to pause it. The abiotic factors are non-living things in an ecosystem. These are things like rocks and minerals. They can be things like the temperature, the soil, the dirt, the water. You'll need to put these two questions on your foldable or around on your notes somewhere. So the question 1 is, what would happen if people were to quote-unquote poison the water? How does this affect the plants and animals that live in this ecosystem? So your poison can be anything. It can be added in poison. It can be runoff from a power plant. It is your decision of how we are poisoning the water, but we do. The second question is, what would happen if the amount of light were to change? Either all the trees grow big and they make a canopy blocking out the light, or the sun were to become dimmer, or the weather patterns were to change. How will life be affected in the environment if the light source was changed? What effect does this have on the plants specifically? So then we have biotic factors. These are things that are living. If you look at the prefix of this word, biotic is bio. Just like with biology is the study of life, biotic are things that are alive. So this would be plants, animals, fungus, protists, and bacteria. So in your notes or your foldable, you'll need to put these other two questions in there. Hopefully we'll get them answered before we're done today. What happens if the population of rabbits in the picture above were to become sick or ill? Who or what would be affected almost immediately? And then number 4 is what if pesticides were introduced into this food web that's in the upper left-hand corner, what or who would be affected? Remember that pesticides are going to affect pests or bugs usually. Producers, more in depth of producers, we kind of touched on it 2 slides ago. So a producer is something that makes its own food or produces its own food. It uses light energy from the sun, a little bit of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, and some water from the soil to create glucose or sugar. This process is called photosynthesis. If you had Miss Bauer, she had this picture beautifully displayed above her door most of last year. So just in your notes, make sure that you have something noted that plants are producers and they go through something called photosynthesis. Consumers are, for the most part, animals that cannot make their own food, and they need to consume or eat others in order to get energy. So we've got three forms of consumers. We've got carnivores that eat only meat, herbivores that eat both. No, herbivores eat plants only, and then omnivores eat both plants and animals. So most people fall under omnivore category because they eat both plants and animals. Herbivores eat mainly plants. This includes flowers, leaves, and grasses, flowers, seeds, pollen. Sometimes they'll eat a bug. That's why it says mainly, because every once in a while a bug gets on their plate and they have to eat it because they didn't know it was there. Most of the herbivores that we see are deer and horses and rabbits and cows, and sometimes even people. These will be your vegetarians. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. These would be most humans, bears, raccoons, some primates, and Miss Carter's dogs because they like to eat vegetables and meats. Carnivores eat mainly meat. Sometimes there's a vegetable that gets stuck on whatever they're eating, and so it happens. Most of the carnivores that we would, know if we thought really hard about it would be like felines, and that includes all kinds of cats, both domestic and wild. Birds of prey, those are eagles, hawks, and owls. If you went to Scarborough Fair with the science club, then you saw these birds of prey, sharks and frogs, and even some spiders. So decomposers, this is the one that's left out of most food chains and food webs, but to me and most scientists, it is the important part because it helps keep the cycle going, and so it's not just a straight chain, but it's almost like a loop. So the decomposers consume the dead plants or animals, and they do this because they break down the unused or dead materials and turn them into nutrients and then put it back into the soil, which allows the plants to then use that nutrients and go through photosynthesis again. So scavengers are ones that you may have talked about in 7th grade. I know when you take Biology 1 in high school, you talk about them quite a bit. There's 4 listed here. They eat other animals that are dead. And the scavengers kind of do what the decomposers do in that they break down materials. In this case, it would be a dead animal or carcass. And they take that animal and then turn it into nutrients that it can use. So the Warbler Finches, this is where we're going to talk about niches. And the niche is a specific area that an animal is able to live in that gives it a specific environment where it's like, okay, I can live here, nobody else is living here. So you've got these 3 warblers here. The Cape May warbler lives really high on the top of the tree. The bay-breasted warbler lives in the middle part of the tree, and then the yellow-rumped warbler lives at the bottom. So each of these 3 birds lives in those specific regions of that tree, and it doesn't really go into the other parts because it's trying to avoid being in competition for the same type of food. So if we had a box of donuts in the classroom, everybody isn't going to be in competition for that one box of donuts. However, if I picked all the people who like to eat kolaches and I put them in the back part of the classroom and I said, if you stay back here, there will be kolaches for you forever. And then I picked all the people who really love donuts and I put them in the front half of the room. And I said, if you stay up here, there'll be more than enough donuts for you, but you can't cross lines. That would give you a niche in the classroom. So then there's some kind of relationships between the animals. There's parasitism. This is a relationship where one benefits and one is harmed or hurt. Most of the parasites that we'll look at are going to be hookworms, mosquitoes, ticks, and then here's an interesting one. It's the host is this little caterpillar, and the parasite are actually these wasp nests eggs that are attached to the back. So if your picture's like me, you've got one smiley face and one crossed out face. The next one is mutualism. This is where both animals in the relationship benefit. They get something from it. So with the honeybee gets pollen in order to make honey and a habitat for himself. And the flower actually gets the pollen from being on the legs of the bees to go to other flowers. So the bee actually helps with the reproduction of these flowers. The sea anemone and then the clownfish. The clownfish rubs on the sea anemone becoming sick. If he were to be eaten by other people, he would make people sick or make animals sick. But when he rubs across the little tentacles of the anemone, he actually pulls off bacterium, keeping the anemone happy and healthy. And then at the bottom, we have a rhino and a tick finch. And the little bird eats the bugs off of the rhino. Commensalism is when one organism is helped and the other one isn't really bothered by it. It's either not helped or harmed. So this would be a smiley face and a meh face. So the one example that I've got here is a hermit crab with a sea anemone on the back of him. So the hermit crab is indifferent. He doesn't really care that the anemone is there. But the anemone actually gets moved through the ocean and is able to get more food and a better selection of food. And then the squirrel and the tree. The squirrel gets a place to live, but the tree doesn't really mind. There's also another aspect of this where the squirrel gets food and the tree isn't hurt by getting this food. So because he's able to get food from the tree, not this peanut, because peanuts don't grow on trees, because he's able to get food and the tree would have dropped the nuts anyway, it's not a help or harm to the tree. Competition. This is when two organisms are after the same food source. So if you play soccer and you're both going after the same soccer ball, you are in competition for the ball. In your notes, as part of one of your exit questions, you were supposed to write at least 2 examples of competition from this food web that's over here on the right. So if you haven't done that, you'll need to stop it, pause it, and do that. And then energy flow through an ecosystem. This is kind of important because without understanding how energy moves, you don't really see that it is a true cycle. The sun starts it. So without the sun, this doesn't exist. The sun gives the producers a source for their food to go through photosynthesis. And then from there, the producers' the producers are consumed by an insect or an animal. And then the animal is then decomposed once it dies by one of these decomposers. And then the decomposers push their nutrients into the inorganic nutrient pool, which would be rocks, abiotic factors. So it pushes those nutrients back into the environment, which then feeds the producers again. I'm going to click this link into the description. It's a really simple kind of goofy looking game that you can play where you match up producers and consumers. And I think that takes us to the end. So this is one that we drew in class. Make sure that when you draw your food webs that you show the transfer of energy. So the plant's energy goes into the bunny. The bunny's energy does not go into the plant. The food chain shows an energy transfer from producer to consumer in one line. So don't make fun of my pictures, but the plant's nutrients go to the bunny and the bunny's nutrients then go to the snake. The snake's nutrients would then go to the decomposers. So make sure that your arrows point to the thing that the transfer of energy is happening. And I will see you in the hall. Have a great afternoon.